The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 2. Agricultural Thought and Industrial Thought. Chapter 3. Violence and Kindliness. Mr. Bernard Shaw and Mr. Bertrand Russell. In a general way, Mr. Russell has a habit of discussing things that are in full swing today as though they belong to a very distant future. Thus he says that some day it may be possible, in place of violence, for the ruler to attain his ends by means of other forms of coercion. It is not necessary, when we are considering political consequences, to pin our faith to the particular theories of the ductless glands, which may blow over, like other theories. All that is essential in our hypothesis is the belief that physiology will in time find ways of controlling emotion, which it is scarcely possible to doubt. When that day comes, we shall have the emotions desired by our rulers, and the chief business of elementary education will be to produce the desired disposition, no longer by punishment or moral precept, but by the far surer method of injection or diet. The men who will administer this system will have a power beyond the dreams of the Jesuits, but there is no reason to suppose that they will have more sense than the men who control education today. By sense here Mr. Russell means, what? That these rulers, with governmental power infinitely magnified, will still wish to rule, get all they can out of their fellows, in short, rather than live, and use the power they have seized, for the good of mankind. Sense does not mean anything more than that. However, it would show very little sense if they applied themselves to these good works, instead of enjoying their power. The words he uses, such as kindliness and sense, are characteristically weak and modest. Such graceful modesty will not today meet the case. And the kindliness of Mr. Russell or Mr. Shaw has an unpleasant sound of moral charlatanism, of the virtue for bon marché of the immensely prosperous old liberal England, that again will not answer the case. No one but a great saint can tread that road today and be respected. Vegetarianism and geniality are a mockery for our present danger and need. In seeing Mr. Shaw's play, St. Joan, it was difficult to resist the suggestion that the cast had been furnished by the Anglican clergy. The kindliness of the Earl of Warwick, the kindliness of the bastard, the kindliness, in different ways, of everybody on the stage, with the exception of the admirable actor who took the part of the Bishop of Beauvais, was overwhelming. It could have been produced by no machinery except that of Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, livened up a little bit for the occasion by Irish charm. The poorness of the language, when such things as green fields had to be mentioned by Joan of Arc, who booed cheerlessly the thin journalese with which she was provided, this was forced on the attention, the incessant rattle of stale, clever argumentation, the heartiness and kindliness pervading everything, the chill of a soulless, arty, indefatigable rational presentation of the theme, must have an increasingly depressing effect on the audience it seems destined to attract, if it is not softened or otherwise modified in new interpretations. It is the swan song of English liberalism staged for the post-war suburbs of London. The kindly twinkle in Mr. Lyle Sweet's eye, his massive Gladstonian jaw and bulky person, is the symbol of that strange thing, part humbug, part fierce possessiveness, part real gentleness and goodness, that has served the white race so ill. Why it is necessary to expose and condemn this humanitarianism, with the especial local color conveyed for us in the word kindly, kindliness having such a different sense to kind, is because it is a sort of spiritual 19th century vulgarization of the great fanatical compassion of which it is a degenerate, genial, tepid form, a half measure, embalmed in rationalistic discourse. It is always on the right tack, it never reaches any effective position. St. Joan, for example, has for its theme a very noble understanding of the unhappy situation of the saint. But Mr. Shaw, in spite of himself, desecrates it with his weak-minded, chilly worldliness, which is plus fort que Louis. He seems to give away, to betray, at least artistically, which in a play is naturally everything, his heroine. He is resolved to show the world this situation, but he has not the power. He laughs, twinkles, and cackles to hide his incompetence where this task is concerned. In the preface of Back to Methuselah there is similarly a fine humane motive at work. But what happens at the end? Well, of course, the play. But Adam and Eve are in the same predicament as Joan of Arc where their presentment by Mr. Shaw is concerned. They speak the jargon of the city tea shop, as you read you fancy them in bathing drawers, a London bank clerk and his girl, great Wells readers, extemporizing in a studio the legend of the creation, prompted, Mephistopheles fashion, by Mr. Shaw, and the preface remains the play. Nobody noticed the new religion in the center of the intellectual whirlpool, he says, referring to the masterwork of his maturity. He now reveals this latent new religion, which turns out to be Bergson's élan vital. He writes, Darwinism proclaimed that our true relation is that of competitors and combatants in a struggle for mere survival, and that every act of pity or loyalty to the old fellowship is a vain and mischievous attempt to lessen the severity of the struggle and preserve inferior varieties from the efforts of nature to weed them out. But in the surplus life in which he suggests, as human creatures, we should live, he has nothing very positive to offer, except his new religion, that is, Bergson's creative evolution. He misrepresents his hero Nietzsche, whom he interprets as follows: Nietzsche, for example, concluding that the final objective of this will was power over self, and that the seekers after power over others and material possessions were on a false scent. This sense is certainly not obtained from a reading of Nietzsche's works. Power over others came very vividly into the program of that philosopher. Again, as a persuasive engine, the exhortation to self-control does not seem the best. It smacks of the YMCA straight talks to young men. All his persuasiveness is haunted by this sort of vulgarity of mind. Almost less than any famous English writer has he what Arnold would call a Celtic tact. He incessantly, when his criticism is finished and his persuasion begins, suggests the Sunday school, or the straight and hearty, man-to-man talk. How, finally, these things can be summarized, is that both Mr. Shaw and Mr. Russell fail as artists. They have no dramatic sense above the rhetoric of the Anglican pulpit. Although they can convince us of their sincerity, they would not be able to convince a stranger from some other system of things, because there is no vibration in their words or universal significance in their gestures. They are just words, opinions, that they have been unable to fuse, and which they have not the force to dramatically present. And their humanitarianism is a poor, prosaic food, meant for a cruder animal existence, and a much easier and more fortunate one, than ours.